I want to welcome you back to our third session of Hope Group. I hope by tonight that you're starting to feel just a little bit more comfortable with all of us. I hope that you are feeling a sense of compassion for me, and I know that all the leaders in the Hope Group want you to feel that we truly, truly care about you. I hope that the anxiety that I think that you probably had the first couple of times that you came to Hope Group, I hope that that is easing for you. And most of all, I hope that you are finding just a little bit of comfort from the things that we're talking about, and maybe the help that you had hoped to find. So tonight, we're going to go ahead and talk a little bit more about what is actually true in grief and what is really considered untrue or considered as myths about grief. Last week we talked about how everyone grieves differently and everyone will have a unique experience in this. We covered how there was no right or wrong way to grieve, how important it is that you face your pain and allow the pain to be there, how crying is not a sign of weakness. And then we ended it with acknowledging that there's really no timeline for healing. You are not being pressured to do certain things in certain time frames in grief. So now I want to come along and just expand on this kind of topic just a little bit more and bring a few more insights into what is really, really true about grief. And the first thing, and I have mentioned this in other sessions, I have told you that I wish that there was some kind of predictable stages of grief. I wish that we were a part of where there would be like 10 steps that we could teach to you. If you will follow these steps, you will arrive at healing. I wish that there was a template for this. And yet, I have to tell you that there's no predictable stages. There's no template. There's no manual that says if you will do this, this, and this, you will arrive at healing. Now, what there is what I'm going to call just probably three very, very broad, I'm going to use this in a very broad sense. There are about three predictable phases that most grievers will find themselves going through. And I think that this will be something that you can relate to, and you'll know that's really true. You've probably experienced it. But there again, I want to tell you right off the get-go, there's no timelines associated with this. The first part, or the first phase, that most people have after loss, and it does not depend on if you knew that this loss was coming or if the loss was sudden, like I referred to my dad, losing him in just a few seconds. The first part of grief is to experience a certain amount of shock and disbelief. I think that what we will take one whole night and talk about this, but basically what happens is we find out that we have lost our loved one. We do not absorb the knowledge, the awareness. We do not absorb the impact of that loss all at one time. It comes gradually and slowly. I believe with everything in me that God created us this way, because if we were to take in the entire impact of that loss, I think we'd be in a heap and we wouldn't be able to live through it either. So what happens is grief comes to us. It affects absolutely everything. It's not that our heart has been broken in pieces. In many cases, it's been shattered beyond recognition. And our psyche, our brains, if you will, our emotions, our body, our will, every single part of us is trying to take this in. And we can only do it gradually, and we can only do it very slowly. And what happens in the first part of all of that disbelief and all of that shock is you will experience very common kinds of things. There's a long list of things that usually happen during that phase, but most of the time you are going to find that you cannot think straight. You are tired. Nothing, your brain just actually even just feels foggy. You will find yourself completely consumed and unable to really think of anybody else or anything else but the one that you've lost. Commonly, when there's shock and disbelief, you will hear people talk about the one who has died and what happened over and over and over again. And that could go on for months. And actually what it is, that is all a part of someone trying to absorb and trying to process what has happened in their life because of this loss. I can share with you just a very good example in my own family. When my dad died suddenly of a heart attack, my stepmother was with him, and they were actually just at home watching TV. It was about 9:30 on a Saturday night. And my stepmother said that she looked over. She was sitting on the couch. My dad was sitting in a chair next to her, and she said something to him, and he didn't respond. And she looked over, and his head was just down like this. It took her a few seconds to realize that something was really wrong with him. And so, of course, eventually she called 911. She called one of my brothers, and of course the paramedics came and all that kind of thing. He actually was not pronounced dead until he was in the hospital, and they, of course, did code blue and all of those heroic attempts to, obviously, to no avail. But for the months that passed, anytime you talked to my stepmother, you would hear that story over and over and over again. And I would say it was probably 6 months to a year before you could call her and ask, how are you doing today, before we didn't go back over all of that. And I kept trying to tell myself and tell my other family members that sometimes it just wears, it got really tiring. It wears on you. I would tell them, this is just part of her trying to process grief. And she had a certain amount of trauma that went with this. I don't know how long it'll be, but there will be a time that she will start to come out of this. And then for most people after loss, there is a second phase that is very, very long and broad, where you and I are beginning to live in the reality of our loss. And you will hear people say sometimes, I think that reality is starting to set in. And definitely that is true. The reality of living without this person is starting to be their everyday experience. And that's where you begin to see more of the depression and more of just an overall pervading kind of sadness that seems to take over. The last big phase that I would say, there's a time of healing. Shock and disbelief are here. Healing is here. The road in between goes like this. And God alone knows what the time frame is from here to here. The next thing that I want to share with you that I believe is a common myth is that if you are struggling in grief with your faith, that you must not be a strong Christian. And I want to say to you tonight, and I will say it probably many times over the next few weeks, there is nothing farther from the truth. We're going to take one whole lesson and talk about where is God in the midst of my pain. And I'm not going to expand on that subject right now, but what I do want to share with you right now is it is a very, very normal part of grief for you to struggle in your relationship with God. There is nothing like grief to bring into question for you everything that you thought that you knew about faith, about grief, about church, about purpose. All of those things are going to come into question. I think the hardest part is that many people will spend a lot of time in grief trying to figure out the why certain things have happened. Why did my dad die instantly? Why did my baby die? Why did my pregnancy not end in birth? Why did my child pull out in front of that car and meet this kind of tragic end? People will spend a lot of time trying to figure out why. And though I can't take this struggle from you, what I will say to you is this. You probably will never have the answer to the why question this side of heaven. I can remember, and it's normal to wonder, just let me say that as tenderly as I can to you. It's normal to wonder. That's part of being human. It's you know, when I was 23 and pregnant and waiting on this baby to come, the thought that she wouldn't be in our home never occurred to me. And then after all that happened, I remember the doctor said, I want you to have this autopsy. And I remember waiting and waiting and waiting for those results because I knew that when I got the autopsy results, everything would make sense then. Everything would make sense. And you know what the results of that autopsy were? The doctors had no answers. Her little body was perfectly formed. And yet she didn't live. And I would spend months and hours asking God, why? I just don't understand. Why can some women be pregnant so easily? And I couldn't bear forth this child. I didn't know at that point I was going to go through that again 10 years down the road. Why? I don't know. The only thing that does happen is that if you and I get to a place that we can start to trust God more and lean into and really rely on the things that we do know to be true, those things will help to diminish the need of the answer to the why questions. But let me say this to you again. Just because you struggle in faith does not mean that you're not a strong Christian. It takes faith to wrestle with faith. Thankfully, many, many people in Scripture loved God and struggled in that relationship at times. And God is there to meet us wherever we are in our relationship with Him and grow us. The next common myth that I want to talk about is one that I know without question that you have heard many, many times. As soon as I say this, you're probably going to be able to just even finish in my sentences. And that is the myth, this is a complete myth, that time will heal all wounds. Time in itself will not heal your broken heart. Healing comes when you and I participate in acts of mourning. Healing will come sometimes in ways that we don't know, in time frames we can't understand. Sometimes certain measures of certain things about our experience kind of heal, other things stay just kind of raw. But what I know is that time in itself will not just fix this for you. What we will share with you is the difference will be what you do with your time There's two terms that you and I are going to have to get used to over the next several weeks. First of all, we will use two different terms, and it fits with this. That's why I want to kind of interject this in here just a little bit. When we are talking about grief, we are talking about the deep emotional feelings that you have in your heart regarding the loss that you've had. Now, there's another word that we want you to become familiar with, and that is the word mourning. mourning, mourning. Mourning is not just the grief we feel. Mourning is actually the things that we will do to express the grief that we're feeling. In other words, what you'll learn over the next several weeks is you and I have got a host, a myriad of lots and lots of feelings that we've got to work through in grief. But grief has to have an outlet. Your acts of mourning are the outlet. And if time doesn't heal all wounds, part of how we help ourselves is participating in the acts of mourning. The next myth that I want to dispel very much tonight is, I can do this grief work all by myself. I think any expert in grief counseling will tell you that you are going to need some support. Whether that support is just one or two trusted people in your circle, that might be enough for you. But for most people, it's not unusual to seek help either through grief groups or support groups, whatever. But most people cannot work through it just by themselves. Most of us need someone that we can talk to about what we're going through. We will spend one night talking about what does healing really look like. I said in one of our other meetings that healing does not mean that you've accepted this loss and you've come to a place that you're over it and now you're just happy about it. You're happy about what has happened. You have a renewed sense of purpose in your life. You've gotten over, you've forgotten the loved one. That is not healing. Healing means that you have come to a place that you have a renewed sense of purpose. You have been able to integrate this loss into your life and live in it with a certain amount of peace, and you are whole again. That is the place that many of us find ourselves in, and we are hoping that at some point that you will experience as well. It doesn't mean that my healed heart has a complete understanding of why it's all happened. There will always be a certain amount of mystery to grief and to life in general. I think death is as much a part of life as you know, it comes to all of us. It's hard to talk about or think about death without having a certain amount of mystery surrounding it all. Grief is hard. It can be unrelenting. It can feel insurmountable at times. But just remember, God is there to help us in it. We are here to help you. We don't want you to go through this by yourself. As you're trying to process some of your grief, here's your first act of mourning that I want to encourage you to do. I said that grief is all the things you're feeling inside. The acts of mourning are the things that we have to do to get these things out. If you are not able to meet with us in person, what I do want to encourage you to do is think about starting to journal. Journaling can be very, very helpful in acts of mourning. You can write down what you're thinking, what you're praying, what you're wondering about. I kept journals after my daughter died. I go back and read them, and I think sometimes it's beautiful to see how far you've come and all the things that God did to help you come that far. But most importantly, I want to encourage you tonight that in those quiet moments by yourself and you're wondering, how am I ever going to get through this? Your mind can go in many, many directions when you're in grief. And I want you to come back and remind yourself of what's really true. What is really, really true about my situation? And truth is, God has said He would help you. There are people available to help you. You have already taken a very positive step towards healing by just participating in Hope Group Ministry or watching these lessons or any of those things. You are already taking some steps. So try to encourage yourself with that tonight. I'd like to close our time together by praying for you yet once again. God, for everyone who hears this message, please bring your truth to them. Please encourage them wherever they are, and let them see and hear, let them hear your voice. Give them the energy, the mental energy, to be able to even start to participate in some acts of mourning that can lead to healing. Oh God, how I thank you for the privilege of serving again. In the name of Jesus, amen.